I laugh out of pain. You're the golden return, got the strength to carry on, walk on, my child, walk on. Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called, What is the Opposite of Shame? And the answer to that is pride, because it's Pride Month. Happy Pride, fellow queers. We did it. We survived another terrible year. We are living in a backlash to the culture of liberation that has been existing for the last decade or so. And it's really scary and really dire. And at times I definitely struggle with hopelessness. If you're struggling with hopelessness right now, I have a couple guided meditations that may help you. There's one about how you're not alone. There's one about co-creating a better world. And there's one about helping political hopelessness. I've just made them because meditations really help me. I'm on like a holistic health and wellness journey for myself and just healing trauma, and also taking care of myself so that I can take care of my community, keep my own cup full in a world that is increasingly fascist. So I laugh out of pain. I just, I have that trauma response where I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. I laugh when it's a coping mechanism, friends. I'm so sorry. So before I get started and dive in, I just want to remind you that the link to the full-length hour-long episode is in the description below, as is the link to my website where you can book healing sessions with me. You can book tarot readings, astrology consultations. There, I have a book, Flight of the Final Girl, that is a book of poetry. It's a poetic memoir that examines my own trauma through the lens of horror. So it's really dark, but but I think also kind of fun and interesting. And also I just love nerding out about horror and art in general. And what else? Oh, don't forget to give this video a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe. I'm just trying to be like a politically informed spiritual teacher, a leftist spiritual teacher, because I think there's just a lot of whitewashing and not caring about the political climate and checking out of the material that goes on in the spiritual community, which results in a kind of gaslighting for anyone who is affected by the modern world. There's a lot of queer erasure. There's a lot of white supremacy, on the sneak, and there's a whole fucking lot of capitalism here. So I just want to be, someone doing something new, but still from a spiritual place, because that's kind of my vibe. And yeah, I hope you'll stick around. I hope you'll share this video, and thank you so much for being here. So let's get into it, y'all. So I have been doom scrolling lately. Relatable? Probably. I cannot stop myself. It's a problem. It's a real, the carpal tunnel is intense.
Okay, boomer.
And the mental health decline is rapid. So one of the things that I've been torturing myself with is I watched a video of an evangelical right-wing Christian pastor or just religious leader or something go to a town hall meeting and give a speech, basically being what the fuck what the flippin' heck are we doing? Pride used to be a sin, and how did we get so far from that? And basically the end of his speech, he's calling for the murder of queer people and trans people specifically, because everyone targets trans people because they're the most marginalized in our society and in the queer community. And also in my own experience and in the experience of my queer community that I'm in direct contact with, the people are more freaked out about gender variance than anything else. Like there is some like homophobia underlying, like when cis straight men hate trans women, there's a homophobia that is the underlying cause of that, right? Like, I don't want to have to question my sexuality, and my attraction to you freaks me out and makes me violent because I don't want to, like, I'm a big straight man, you know what I mean? And it's ditto with butch women. Like, there's just issues with fear of men and fear of masculinity in women, and just, I don't know, everything gets all tangled and mixed up. And instead of people being like, I think I have some stuff about gender that I need to unpack, they're just like, you're making me feel things and I'm so mad at you. And that is unfortunate. Hey y'all, so this is my very first editing room interruption. So I was just talking about how trans women are prone to experiencing violence or sexual violence specifically by cis straight men who have this underlying insecurity and like homophobia that results in them taking out their aggression and their insecurity with their own sexuality, or their refusal to unpack their own sexuality or gender, or just like not be fucking homophobic, out on trans women. And I just briefly mentioned butch women, but I want to just like dive a little deeper into that really quick, just to not leave anybody out, because I think that trans women and like femme gay men, gay cis men, and butch women, butch cis women, and trans men all experience the same kind of violence and sexual violence from homophobic cis straight men, even though their gender experiences and life experiences are very different, because I think they touch the same root, the same issue, which is they, you know, when insecure homophobic cis straight men encounter people who vary from patriarchal notions of what a woman is and what should elicit an attraction from them, or even like not even elicit one, but sort of like, how dare you live outside of my idea of what a woman is, or how dare you embrace femininity when, I don't know. I'm not gonna like pretend to dive into that sick well of bigotry, but I don't know exactly what I'm getting at here. I just think that, like, you know, trans men, when cis straight men find out that they are trans, are prone to the same kind of violence as trans women. And I think that people who exist on the fringes of like what the gender binary dictates, or what patriarchal notions of womanhood or manhood or whatever, you know, it's all fucking bullshit. But anyone who dares challenge that with their very existence is in very real danger of violence. And like, you never know how someone is going to take you. And I think this is talked about a lot, but yeah, I just didn't want to leave anybody out. And like, I know that part of the bathroom discussion, you know, with like these TERFs thinking that trans women are just trying to get into women's space, like cis women's spaces, to prey on them or whatever. You know, butch women I know, butch cis women I know, experience that fear as well, because like, when someone who's not perceived as like traditionally feminine is in a women's bathroom, people freak out and they like try to get them kicked out of bathrooms. They try to like call the cops on them, and as per usual, cops tend to side with people who embody the status quo, people who look cis, you know, the Karens of the world. They're always on the right side of the law in the eyes of the law. And so, yeah, it's like all the same root, which is, I think, it's like a chicken egg thing. It's like, are people more freaked out by gender variance or queerness? And the answer is, I think both. And because they are separate things, but also, you know, they tend to occur together, or people who understand their sexuality or are queer have more of what's the word, like, they have more of a understanding of gender and like are more willing to do the necessary unpacking than cis straight people. And I go on about this in every episode, which is just that, you know, if you're marginalized in some way, you're much more likely to question. And if you are a person of privilege, you're less likely to question because you're more comfortable and you don't fucking have to. So yeah, I hope that, I don't know, I feel like it's messy, but like that, I just wanted to clarify a little bit. Hey y'all, editing room digression once again, because I just can't get this point fully made. But you know, my last interjection, I was talking about how, you know, anyone who varies from the gender binary and from like patriarchal notions of femininity is more prone to experiencing discrimination and violence against cis straight men, especially homophobic cis straight men. But I think that my point was still a little too much like playing on that trope of like it's repressed homosexuality that inspires these violent, aggressive acts. And I just don't really think that's the case, so I don't want to imply that. I think mostly, to sum up this struggle bus point, it's just that, you know, cis straight men who are homophobic, who are like conservative leaning, who haven't unpacked gender, who haven't unpacked their sexuality or like sexuality in the world, people who really buy into the belief that like they are the standard and everyone else is other, is heavily identified with their gender because their gender affords them power, and not just power in society, but like power over others. And if we go, this is the same thing that happens with whiteness. Like if we go about unpacking gender, they will fall from the top of that hierarchy and things will have to be more equitable. And as I can't remember who said this, but someone really, really smart, smarter than me, said that when you are used to privilege, when you are used to power over, equity feels like oppression. And that is the point I've been motherfucking trying to make. Thank you. Back to the real video. Because it really is a program that is necessary to unpack. If you haven't watched my video that has like 0 views called What Gender that I did last year for Pride, go watch that because I talk more in depth about that. But I just think that gender is a program that is a weapon of the patriarchy to keep cis straight male as the default and everything else is other. And through that like mechanism or that control paradigm or whatever, is able to separate like financially, rights wise, like just in every other conceivable way, because every facet of privilege or of oppression feeds the others, right? Even if it's from creating separation where like you can't take care of each other because you're competing with each other for resources. It's just one of the many modes of control and separation and like hierarchical societal building. And I think it's necessary for everyone to unpack. It doesn't mean that like everyone is queer, although I kind of think everyone is, at least a little bit, or that no one has a gender or that gender doesn't exist. Gender is on like a rainbow spectrum, and that means that there are more nuances in gender than we think or are willing to admit. And that like the extremes, as in like man and woman, are actually more rare than we are taught to believe. If you think of data as a bell curve, like the middle is the biggest part. The middle holds the most of the sample size. So I don't know. You do the fucking math. I'm just a musician. So, the horns are a honkin'. New York City, where the horns never cease. Lord help me. Why? This is the point in the honk where I'm like, oh no, is someone dead with like their head on the horn? And then I get freaked out, and then I get upset because I'm like, oh, I was such a dick, like I was being so judgmental. This is for real. Okay. There was a break. Someone's doing this on purpose. I'm allowed to be mad. Okay. I'm gonna carry on. I hope that's not too annoying. How okay is it to yell shut the fuck up out my window at noon on a Friday? I'm not shitting you. That alarm went on for 5 minutes and then it stopped, and then I started the video and then it started again. So we're carrying on. I'm so sorry about the beeping, but the people outside are wild, inconsiderate. So I don't remember where I was. Oh, unpacking gender. So conservative pastor calling for basically the genocide of queer people because we are sin. It's really scary, and I think it's really abhorrent to use scripture in a way that is so evil and like judgmental. And I know this has been discourse to death, like you cherry picking what parts of the Bible you use or discard based on who you're trying to like eradicate or whatever is totally, it's just like you're full of shit. You're just a total hypocrite, and you're operating from a control place instead of a loving place. And as a spiritual teacher and practitioner, and like someone who I feel like I have a direct line to God, at least my manifestation of God, that's just not how this shit works. Like my God wants me to be loving. My God wants me to be compassionate. And I talk about this metaphor in the podcast. Like, I feel like when I came out of my troubled childhood, I was just a jagged rock form, and life through hardship, through struggle, through kind of squeezing out or like rubbing up against harder surfaces and smoother surfaces, I've just become a smoother and smoother and smoother stone until this point where like I sort of have my compassion kicks in first. And, Walk On podcast, like my whole philosophy is about walking away from what's hurting you, because that's the only way to tap into compassion on this level. If you're constantly being hurt, if you're constantly being mistreated, it's much harder to get out of resentment. And that's also why I think these systemic things need to be looked at and unpacked for a spiritual person to like really step into their highest self. Because if you're still carrying capitalism, Teal Swan, a shade of it all, you're gonna be hurting people, you're gonna be exploiting people, and that's not it. Like that's not what Jesus is about. That's not what Buddha was about. Like, let's release the shit that doesn't serve us, that makes us hypocrites, that makes us bad people, and step into the light on every level, not just the ones that feel good, I love crystals as much as the next bitch, but Google how we get them, and then ask yourself if your vibe of your house can't be achieved another more sustainable way. I don't know. I just think the misunderstanding of like the concept of pride it's on purpose, 100,000%. It's just appealing to the lowest common denominator and the lowest vibe of person, just being like, I hate these people, you should hate these people too. And I think the fear of the status quo, of people who fit into the status quo, is really based on not understanding where their suffering is coming from. And I think that when you see someone living their truth, like living extremely authentically, living from a place of love and openness and experience and compassion and confidence, you know, you can have one of two reactions. You can either be the type of person who's like, wow, I love that. Like, that excites me. I'm drawn to that. I'm like magnetized to that. And that person's courage and bravery makes me want to be braver and more courageous and also more loving. And I understand that this is not a finite resource. I understand that anyone can have this. Like, if that person achieved it, it means I can too. And you're empowered by it. Or you can see it happening and you're like, I hate that. That makes me mad. That makes me feel inferior. That makes me feel threatened. That makes me feel like if that person's taking up space, there's no space for me to take up. And that threatens my very way of life. And in many ways, that's true. Because, like, if your faith, which is in this particular video that I'm speaking about, in that specific context, their business, their livelihood is based on hatred, is based on marginalization, is based on superiority, and is based in fear. Like, fear is one of the most effective control mechanisms out there. And if you can make people feel afraid, then you can control them. It's like how we gave up all our rights sort of happily after 9/11, because we were like, yeah, I'm fucking scared. They say the threat level's high. Like, let me slap a support the troops sticker on the back of my car and like say, yeah, tap my phones, like listen to my conversations. Fuck freedom. Am I right, folks? And it works. And that's why I'm really suspicious of anyone who operates from a place of fear or like operates from a place of superiority, because like, why? If you are giving good information, if you're being a helper, if you're being a source of love, then that should be enough. You shouldn't need to like get power from that sort of way of operating. You should be able to just like trust the work, you know what I mean? Or just like make quality content or art, or have a good message, have a universal message, be open, you know, come as you are. And if you're not doing that and you need to operate from a place of fear, I'm like, what's your real goal? I'm a little suspicious of you. And what are they afraid of? You know, they're afraid of if they say like, oh yeah, it's okay to be queer, you know, like we welcome everyone, it's an open door policy. Then all of the narcissistically aligned people, all of the deeply insecure people that make up that congregation will go elsewhere, because they're like, well, this place doesn't make me feel better than anyone, and I need to feel better than in order to feel like I have a right to exist, because my main way of operating is through feeling superior. And like, how many people do you know? I know a lot of people who are like this in various communities and like ways of being, and it's universal if you're operating from a space of ego. And not to get too far off the path of like the topic of this video, because I do want to get into the joyful aspects of pride. And like, what does pride mean? Pride is the opposite of shame. Shame is a little parasite that lives inside of us, that's planted from a very young age, that most of us carry, even if it wasn't from your family of origin. Like, even if your family of origin was great, you still have had to move through the world with people who are operating from their own space of shame. And shame is so uncomfortable. It's so torturous. It's so light squashing and soul sucking that you will do anything to get out of its energy. You know, you will do anything to feel even momentary relief from that feeling of shame. And for one very effective way of getting out of the feeling of shame is to project it onto someone else, is to make someone else feel shame, because don't forget, misery loves company. And that's what happens in schools. You know, it's like a bunch of people living in shame, not able to be themselves, not able to even explore themselves, inundated with these paradigms of like class and race and sexuality and gender. And not to say that those things don't exist. I think that those things as identity markers can be really beautiful and should be celebrated. After all, everyone, as I've said a bajillion times, is a unique manifestation of God. Like, everyone is perfect in their makeup, is like exactly who they should be, and should be able to express the fullness of themselves, the fullness of their genius, the fullness of the light that they are, without judgment, without shame, without restriction. And if we were all able to do that, the world would be so much more livable and like joyful of a place. But because of capitalism, because of white supremacy, because of patriarchy, we're not able to do that, because we are put these programs of like white supremacy, of capitalism, of the cis heteropatriarchy are put in us from a very young age. And so we learn that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And we form these little factions, and we take our shame and our insecurity and our feelings of inadequacy out on one another. And we start trying to control one another, and we start trying to like isolate or ostracize, and so we just carry this shame with us throughout our lives. Luckily, I'll say many people kind of outgrow that way of being, and they start to realize like, oh, it doesn't really make me feel better long term to like make other people feel terrible, and maybe I have some healing to do, and like maybe I need to incorporate some self-awareness, and like maybe boundaries are a thing I should be doing. And you start to like choose a different course as you realize that like maybe that's not working out for you. Or some people don't get fully brainwashed into that way of being in the first place, and so they get to live a little bit more of a free life. Although I will say that you do suffer a lot more when you're an individual. You do suffer a lot more when you're treading a path that hasn't been, paved for you. Like, this is like why autistic activist Twitter is one of my favorite groups, because it's in an autistic nature to be a nonconformist and to like not follow social constructs just because they're there. Like, because I said so doesn't work for an autistic person. And I think that there's a lot of like answers to be found in people who never bought into the way things are supposed to be, even if they like are really good at masking or whatever. There's still an inherent questioning and like and diversion from the status quo that takes place there, that I think holds a lot of answers to a lot of questions of like, where do we go from here? Like, how do we make things better? How do we make the world more equitable? How do we treat each other more gently? Like, that's why it's my favorite place. And that's also why I love the queer community so much, because when you go there, if you're in the right circles, there are people who carry the white supremacist cis heteropatriarchy, I forgot the capitalist part, wherever they go. Even marginalized people will carry that program with them within themselves because it makes them feel safe. And they'll try to enforce that on one another because, you survive by orienting yourself to it as much as possible, like to get as close to whiteness as you possibly can, to get as close to patriarchal standards of masculinity and femininity as you can. Like, I had this queer friend who's like a very gorgeous butch lesbian. We were best friends from childhood, and she once commented on one of my photos, and she was like, "What's with the armpit hair?" And it's like, oh my God, like no, I actually think she called it disgusting. And I was like, this is so disappointing. Like, why are you bringing this into this? We're both queer. Like, there's no fucking rules. And so when I'm with like truly like gender non-conforming, queer like punks, I find a lot of like comfort in knowing that you can check out of this shit as much as you want to. It just takes a lot of unlearning, but you are going to come up against those systems everywhere you go, in workplaces, in content sectors, in relationships with other people, even people in your own community. And like, so it is tough, it is hard. But, coming out is hard. I am so inspired when I see like a family whose child comes out and they're just like so supportive and so protective, and like they really go to the mat, so to speak, for their kids, and they stand up for them and they make sure they feel safe and supported and loved, and like who they are is okay. And I love seeing like allyship, ally vibes in straight people and cis people and like people who don't have a stake in the game. Like I think it's so fucking beautiful and it really touches my heart. But that hasn't totally been my experience, and a lot of people my age, you know, I'm 34, and I think a lot of, you know, mid millennials really discovered their gender identity and queer identities on the internet. And so it's relatively new for us. Not that these conversations haven't been going on forever. I cited in my podcast episode Leslie Feinberg, who is like a gender activist, a union activist, and they wrote Stoned Butch Blues, which is like one of the greatest novels on that, like it's fiction but it's queer commentary, like of all time. Like just so nuanced, so beautiful, so devastating, so honest and authentic, and just like gorgeous. Just cried through the whole thing. And they have been, you know, they were an intersectional like queer activist from way back. And so it's been in existence for a really long time. So this isn't new information, but I feel like each generation has to sort of discover all of this stuff because, like I said, we're inundated with the status quo from a very young age. And so much about survival in school is rooted in adhering to those systems, you know, being as not challenging or not diverting from them as you possibly can. And it's not until adulthood, like when you can make your own financial decisions, when you can, you know, if you need to cut off your family, you can. If you need to leave a job, you can. Like we have a lot more freedom once you become an adult, and then you can really start getting to know yourself. But when you're like trapped in the home of your family of origin and you have no access to financial independence or anything like that, like, or you're stuck in a school where you're like the only queer kid or whatever, it's just a totally different experience. Or if your like family is religious and so you have to go listen to sermons about how evil you are every day, and it's a lot. We're up against a lot. And I think that's why, not pride as a parade or pride as like rainbow capitalism, but pride as in like the opposite of shame. You know, I grew up and lived until 5 years ago in Virginia, and I was a late bloomer in every aspect of my life and like a late queer. And I had my first girlfriend when I was like 25, I think, and or 26. And I was shocked, you know, after being with cis men for most of my life. I am an affectionate person. I've always held my partner's hands. I've always kissed them in public. Like, I'm just like that. I'm a lovey-dovey sort of Libra ass bitch. And the things people would yell at us, and like the, you know, getting called an abomination, and like people saying like we were disgusting, or even like the fetishization that straight cis men would do at us. It was just eye-opening to me. And you know, it's the thing with like privilege, with like straight passing privilege or whatever. Even though it hurt me to be closeted and it hurt me to have this whole realm of my identity like not even be accessible to me, that's painful. But the safety, you know, the not having to question anything, you know, the being able to like grab your partner's hand or even like shove your tongue down their throat without someone taking personal offense to it or like throwing holy water on you is just wild. And that's not even like talking about my gender journey and how differently I'm treated when I don't present as femme. And yeah, so I've been a learning. So pride as not something that just happens in June, as not something that's just about, you know, being able to shop at certain places, although in many ways, like, that is kind of important. I read a thread on Twitter about how, like, used to, if you were visibly gay in a restaurant or in a store, like, they could ask you to leave. They could fully refuse to serve you. And that's not even to mention, like, gay marriage and gender affirming medical care being accessible. I mean, we see it now as, like, these things are being taken away, how important they are to, like, survival and quality of life, and how necessary they are, and how scary they are to people who have a certain amount of stake in upholding their own status quo of, like, staying at the top of the proverbial food chain and devouring those of us who are just supposed to be docile worker drones and make money for rich people, make more money for rich people. So as I wrap this video up, because I've been going a while, what is the opposite of shame? Pride. What is the opposite of shame? Safety. What is the opposite of shame? Being seen, you know, being okay with being seen, being vulnerable, being brave, speaking your truth, not hiding, embracing your full self, you know, showing up as that full version of yourself, and expecting people to love you. And if they don't, telling them to fuck off. And also, like, community care, community support, showing up for your fellow queers, showing up for people who are marginalized in different ways, like being, like Leslie Feinberg, like a full, well-rounded intersectional activist and not leaving anybody behind. And, you know, shame is incredibly toxic. Shame is incredibly harmful. Shame is really, really tough to carry with you. It's so heavy. And so if I can leave you with anything at the end of this ramble, it's like, be prideful, be proud of who you are, be proud of your survival, be proud of your resilience, be proud of the way that you have carried on, be proud of the way you love, be proud of the way you look. Just fall in love with yourself more and more every day. Get to know yourself more and more every day. Remember that being made in the image of the universe means that you are ever expanding, that you are allowed to change your mind, that you're allowed to do something different, that you're allowed to question, you're allowed to say no, you're allowed to stand up for yourself, and keep fighting the good fight every day. I love you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work. Happy healing. Bye.